Okay. All right. So just want to thank you all for sharing your stories and experiences. Um, so before we dive into racism, just wanted to have some time to reflect about what we heard, what in our sharing. What are some common things that you see, or common patterns that emerged out of our sharing? Anyone?
What I noticed is that the white people are kind of suspicious about us.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Right. And that's because
We are
the
different.
racism.
Mhm.
Yeah, we're different. And just because we're different and we are treated differently, right? That's what we call racism. What are other patterns or similarities have you heard or seen as we shared? Anyone?
It doesn't exactly related to what I heard, but I keep, I cannot help but thinking about that education matters.
Mm-hmm.
I heard
Mm-hmm.
from some church, does education every year. I really think that matters. That kept coming back to me.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Sure. Right. Anyone else? Okay. So there are a couple things that I noticed as I was listening to your sharings, is that for whatever reason, there, whether your children are with you, or for whether you don't want to confront, there is a common pattern of being silent and not calling it out when you are faced with racism. So there were actually quite a few of you who said, "Well, I did not question back," or, "Well, I didn't want to say anything," and so I'm sure you've heard it said in many different ways. Silence is basically, silence is complicit, meaning that if you are silent, if you don't call it out, if you don't confront it, basically you are perpetuating, or you're letting it happen. That makes sense. So if you a lot of the like the movement or the activists will say, you see something, you say something, right? Just like I just flew in red eye from San Francisco yesterday morning, and there's like all over the place in airport, they will say, there's a little message saying that, you see something, then you report, right? Like, so just like that, if you see something on racism against you or your family, right, then it is important for you to call it out and say it. So some of you kind of started your sharing, "I'm not sure if this is racism or not," right? There's few of you started your story by saying, "I'm not sure if this is racism or not." So here's a thing. If it feels like it, if it smells like it, then it is. Right? You've heard those expressions. If it feels like it, if it smells like it, if it looks like it, it is. And so it's important for for you to call it what it is. So I know all of you, such a good pastors and such a wonderful hearted people that you also kept making excuses for behavior of other people towards you or your family or any of those behaviors in your congregation. Oh, they don't mean it. Oh, they just don't know. I know, they probably didn't mean to harm me or my family. They just did not know, and so they were doing it. So what you are doing is you are making excuses for their racism against you and your family. And so it is important for us to also stop making excuses for other people's behavior. Does that make sense? So racism is racism. There is no way to make it any better. There's no way to sugarcoat it. And another thing is it's important for you to have a clear boundary, right? So what is your boundary? Is verbal abuse your boundary? Or is physical abuse your boundary? Or how much are you willing to let it go? And what is your absolute, no go? So just to pick on 박정돈 목사님's story, right? If that lady dragged my 2-year-old, right, with the hoodie, dragged my 2-year-old out, I would be very upset, right? And so, there's a point where we have to say it does not matter whether I'm a pastor or not. Okay, if it involves my child with being that physical, then I will not tolerate it. Right? So it's important for you to have a very clarity on what is tolerable and what is not. Okay. So these are some of the patterns that I kind of saw as you were sharing, and I hope that throughout our time, it will become a little bit more clear to you that racism is sin, and it's not something that we can just brush it to the side or put it under the rug or just ignore it thinking that it's going to go away. It will not. All right. So, some of what the patterns that I have seen, I just saw as you were sharing your story. For some of you, it may be like, oh, that's a little bit strong. That may be it sounds like a little strong response. So if you feel that way, please talk to me. You know where to find me, because as I said, it's racism is a sin that is so huge, so damaging, not just for us who are receiving, but also for those who are perpetuating. And if we don't, if we don't really confront it in the way that it needs to, then we will not be able to make any change. All right. Any question so far?
I have a question for your comment.
Mm-hmm.
I have totally agree and understand what you meant. And actually, I have the same perspectives. But in other side, we always have some clear reason if we decide to stay silent. Because protect our kids or protect myself for negative consequences from my reaction if I make them upset. So what's going to happen they punch me in the parking lot. I have no confidence. How can I beat on him, or who's gonna help me out? Because
Mhm.
I have already born to be physical vulnerable, right?
Right.
Not only from the race, even from the gender.
Mhm. Sure.
So
Sure.
I know, but I just want to say that, so we don't want to take always excuse, right? So
Mhm.
that all things always coexist in our mind. I think
Mm.
nobody, yeah, everyone knows how we react, how we need to do it, but that's the reason why we stop
Okay.
practicing it. You know
Right.
what I mean? You know, so
I hear you. I
I'm
hear you.
always living and struggling in that dilemma.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
honestly, fortunately, for last 11 years in New England, I didn't have to handle with the struggling,
Mhm.
but still, it's always ongoing issues. So
Sure.
whenever I saw the news, if the old woman punched by New York Station,
Mhm.
I'm thinking if I were that woman, you know
Right.
what I mean? Yes. And you are
Yeah,
also
I hear
thinking
you.
in
Right.
the situation as an Asian woman. So I'm
Right.
wondering your opinion or any others
Right.
experience.
Okay. So yes, I said stop making excuses and you need to confront. However, you also have to be smart, right? And that's what Nami Muksanim is pointing out. So, the examples that I was basically just sharing based upon the examples that you shared with us. So, like using Kim Seung-Lee Muksanim's example, right? So he said, I should have asked that asked the hostess in the restaurant, like, do you ask this question to all of your customers, right? So rather than just staying quiet, it's those are the important moments where you have to speak up. Okay, but as Nami Muksanim said, you know what? You have to be aware of your surrounding, where you are, and the situation, and if you feel like, okay, this is not the moment for me to confront, but I need to find other ways, right, to address this issue. For instance, the example you gave, right, as a petite Asian woman, if you are being attacked physically, you need to remove yourself from that. That's not the time for you to confront them about their racism. But you will need to go back, right? Either file a police report, or or get someone that you can trust to support you and help you through this. So you have to be smart about this too. So I think Jesus said, be gentle as a dove, but also wise as a serpent. So racism, confronting racism requires us to confront it gentle ways, also in a wiser way, depending on the situation and the context. Okay. All right, any other questions before we move on? We're okay to move on? Okay. All right, I'm going to share my screen. So we're going to now talk about understanding racism. And so first thing is, what is race, right? So it all begins with the word race. Racism begins with the word race. And so one thing is that there is but one race among us, and that is the human race. Actually, we did talk about this during my session at Madang Week. Remember? Do you remember that conversation? So I think Younghak Moksanim is the one who brought this question up. So what do I mean when we say there is but one race among us, and that is the human race? What do we mean by that? Anyone? What do we mean by that?
Everyone is equal.
Okay, yeah, everyone is equal. So going back to the creation story back in Genesis, chapter 1 and 2. How many kinds of humans did God create?
Only image of God.
Okay. So how many kinds of humans did God create?
One.
Just one, right? Just one. What does that tell us?
God considers us in one race.
Yeah, we are just one people. We are all one people, one human race. God did not create different groups of people, right? God did not create different kinds of humans. God created one. So regardless of how we look, skin colors, the language, we are just one human race, one people. Right? So racism is using the differences, the accents, external features, skin color, to assign and rationalize the values of the people. You are superior because you are white. Your skin is lighter. You are inferior because you are dark, right? That's what racism is. Separating people by the differences. And so the racism is the oppression based on, well, race, it's in quotes, but actually it's the ethnicity, right? So we are one human race. We have different ethnicities depending on where we are in the world, where we live, the culture. Make sense? So what are some examples of racism and racial prejudices in the Bible? And there are many examples of racism and prejudices in the Bible. So can you name some?
So usually the people who has the racism, they use the story of Noah and his sons. God separated them. When God separated them, they said God distinguishes the class between the people.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is the usually they use it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So the wrong wrong theology, right, and teachings that comes as a result of racism. What are other examples of racism and racial prejudices in the Bible?
Israelites in Egypt.
Israelites in Egypt, yeah, they were treated like they were slaves. They were treated as slaves, and and not as, not in the same category as humans as the Egyptians. So if you read carefully in Genesis, so Genesis chapter 43 it's about Joseph, right? Joseph is already the second man next to Pharaoh. Basically, he has power over the whole land of Egypt, right? And his brothers come. This is the second time that they came, and he finally reveals himself to his brothers, right? And right there, as they were eating, it says, and I quote from the Bible, they, Egyptians, served Joseph by himself, the brothers by themselves. Now, this is the different groups eating, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews, for that is detestable to Egyptians. Okay, that's directly quoting from the Bible. So that's racism, right? That Egyptians eat separately from the Hebrews because it is detestable to them to eat with Hebrews. So that's racism. Okay, what are other racism incidents that you see in the Bible?
I think it is quite controversial, but in the book of Joshua, the
Mhm.
Canaanites and all other peoples other than Jewishes is something that conquered, something that get rid of.
Yeah, sure. So a lot of, those stories have actually been used, right, for European countries to colonize countries in Africa, South America, Central America, and North America, to rationalize why they're able to just come in and take over, conquer, and colonize. Okay, what are other examples of racism?
Samaritan
Mm-hmm. Yes.
and
Yeah.
Greece.
Mm-hmm. Right. All those animosity and towards Samaritans, and not valuing them as people. Anyone else?
I I would acknowledge that the Daniel's story is a little bit part of the racism, as the Babylonians, they trained them with their foods and their culture. So and
Mm-hmm.
also they changed the Daniel and his friend's name as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, for Koreans, we know what that feels like, right? Many Koreans under Japanese occupation, they were given Japanese names and taught Japanese history and all of that, right? Okay. Numbers 12, there's a story about Miriam and Aaron speaking against Moses because he marries a Cushite woman. Cushites are African, meaning that dark-skinned African woman. And so they speak against it. So, again, that's the racism or the racial prejudice in the Bible, right? And then the funny story is, so God speaks to Miriam and Aaron, but only punishes Miriam for speaking against Aaron. I'm speaking against Moses. So I need to ask God about this when I face God, when I meet God face to face. It's like, how come you only punish Miriam? So she had to suffer leprosy until Moses prayed for her, but Aaron wasn't punished. So anyway, I don't know. It may be whoever has written the story maybe left it out. Anyway, so origins of modern racism. So I call it modern racism because although the racism as we are describing it has been rampant, right? It's been part of the human history, all the way from Genesis, all the way through our through the world history and so forth. But I call it a modern racism because it wasn't until the 16th century where the term racism came into focus. So Johann Friedrich Blumenbach is a 16th century anatomist who studies body anatomy. He's the one who kind of created the race classification. So he studied like the skulls from all over the world. And he kind of saw that, you know, the skulls had different, like slightly different shapes or uniqueness, depending on where they came from. So skull from Africa looked a little bit different from skulls from Asia or the Americas or the Europe, right? So just by studying all these different physiology and anatomy, he classified that there's a Negroid, which is the black, and then there's Mongoloid, Asian and Native American, and then Caucasian white. So and as he was classifying the Negroids, Mongoloids, and Caucasian, he basically hypothesized that Caucasian is the superior because one is, so do you know where the word Caucasian comes from?
I remember you explained that in the Madang when we get there in New Jersey, from the
Yeah,
Fisher area.
right.
Name, you said, right?
Yeah. So there is a Caucasus Mountain, which is right in between Russia and Georgia.
Oh.
Georgia, the country. So Caucasus Mountain is actually in Georgia.
Oh.
Right near Russia. And so the skull that came from that region, he thought that was the perfect shape of skull. And also he believed that Caucasus Mountain to be the birthplace of humanity, which is, I don't know, you know, there's so he concluded that because it's the birthplace of the humanity and because it had the best shape, the skull had the best shape, it must be the superior race. And so he concluded that the Caucasian is superior, right? So what are the consequences of the racism? So because of that kind of racism, and so we have to understand in the 16th century, the work of Blumenbach and there were a few others who were studying the anatomy of the humans, right? So looking at the skulls of people from different regions and so forth, and deciding which one is better and which one is not. As they were classifying, that was science for them, right? That was their time of modern day science. And so everyone kind of, you know, jumped on the bandwagon and like, okay, so we have different groups of people and they called it races. So that's where the races come from. So the Negroid race, Mongoloid race, and the Caucasian race. These are actually ethnicities that they were describing, but they were calling it the race. hence the word racism. So as they were categorizing and then putting them in order of superior and inferior, the consequences are that they justify enslavement of Africans, right? And then it also justified conquest and colonization, as we talked about it earlier. And then also because of these racism thoughts, so false teaching, racially biased interpretation of the Bible and theology began to flourish. This is when they started talking about what Igisong Muksanim said earlier, the Noah story. And so because of what Noah had said, that one Ham's descendants will serve Japheth, Yabed, and so forth. So the slavery and all of that began to be legitimized and rationalized. So Ta-Nehisi Coates is an author, and this is what he says: race is the child of racism, not the father. What do you suppose he means by that? Race is the child of racism, not the father.
Mm.
I think the race is kind of a consequences of racism, not it was before. It was as it is before.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone
it-
else? Go ahead, finish. Sorry.
It's like the somebody created.
Yeah. So definitely it is created. And so you will hear the expression like, so racism is a social construct, meaning, people made it, right? Racism is something that the group of people have created. So race is the child of racism and not the father. It's basically, it's the same expression as, which one came first? Did the chicken come first or did the egg come first? Right? So what Ta-Nehisi Coates is saying is racism was first. Because of this racism, they created races. They created different groups and categories and then put them in order of who's more important, who's not, who's superior or not. So not because the races were there first, it was the racism who created the categories and all those orders. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions so far? Any questions about what racism is and how it came to be? No question? I explained it really well. Okay. Then we will then move on. So there are different types of racism. And so we're going to spend some time identifying the different types of racism. So the first is personal racism. What is personal racism? What is your understanding of personal racism?
Personal experience, like one-on-one level.
So okay, that will be something else where that's gonna come next.
Okay.
So personal racism is basically that one person's belief system, right? What that
Oh.
one person believes internally, right? What that person feels, thinks about other people. Okay, that would be the personal racism. And so when that is not expressed to other people, right? But you just have that own thinking, that would be the personal racism.
Can you call it favoritism?
Yeah, favoritism is another way racism is expressed, for sure. All right. Any other thoughts on personal racism? No? Okay. So then the next one is interpersonal racism. Okay. And this is what Nami Moksain was talking about, one-on-one, from one person to the next. So, I mean, it could be individuals or it could be groups, but from in between the persons is when those personal racism, the idea, the belief is expressed against someone else based upon their, ethnicity or the differences. So Joseph Song Muksanim shared earlier that his congregation complains about his accents, and for him, he understands that it may not be racism, just because, hey, I do have accents, right? And it may be difficult for them to understand. So that may be true, right? And so when I work with a lot of CRCC pastors, Koreans or not, and if they have heavy accent, that if I have hard time understanding, right, I do encourage them, you need to really work on your English. So, so that you can be effective in your ministry, right? So because of our ministry context, we have our responsibility. Pastors' work is articulating and communicating, right? That's a huge part of what we do. So if your accent is a stumbling block for your congregation, then you must work on it. At the same time, when I do workshops, CRCC workshops with clergy and lay leadership, I say to the lay leadership, so everyone has an accent, regardless. I said this earlier too, right? Everyone has an accent, regardless whether you were born in the US or whether you came from outside, right? And so sometimes the northerners in the US will have hard time understanding the drawls of the Southern Americans. So if a Southern American pastor is appointed somewhere in Minnesota, way up north, right? And the congregation may complain, I can't understand this pastor's Southern drawl, right? And then what needs to happen is, just like what I said, the pastor then needs to now start working on his or her accent, right, for the congregation. At the same time, the congregation also needs to work on trying to understand the Southern drawl, so that we start here, and after months and after a year, you meet somewhere in the middle. So that's what I tell the lay leadership and lay people. So you are in a cross-racial, cross-cultural appointment, meaning your pastor is of different ethnicity, different language, different culture. And so it's expected that your pastor will have a different, will have some accent coming from outside of the US and whatnot. So now, but the gift your pastor brings is that your pastor is going to help the congregation be culturally competent. And being culturally competent is not just about understanding, but see, our tongues has to become culturally competent, and a lot of people are. So a lot of white people love tacos, sushi, Korean food, kimchi, right? That's because their tongues have been trained to be culturally competent. So they're able to enjoy various diverse food. Likewise, your ears need to be also trained to be culturally competent. And so this is your opportunity for your ears to be able to hear different accents and understand. So congregation tries to work on it, pastor tries to work on it, right? So that's the interpersonal racism. And then there's internalized racism. What is internalized racism?
Internalized in that person, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
By the education or by the family tradition?
All of the above.
Yeah.
So internalized racism comes out, it's an internalization of the racistic stereotypes, values, and images and ideologies. So one of the example of internalized racism is, that the Korean cosmetic companies making a huge profit out of one product all throughout the world, worldwide. You know what that is? What is it?
Again, what did you say?
So Korean cosmetic companies,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Is making a killing, meaning it's making huge profits all over the world
Oh, yeah.
through this one
Okay.
product.
Okay.
What is it?
Whitening.
Yes,
Whitening.
the whitening cream.
Cosmetics, I know, yeah.
Yeah, the whitening cream.
Yeah, we want to be whiter.
Because everyone wants to be
That's
whiter.
our standards of beauty. Yeah.
That's the internalized racism. See, people don't even know why we have to be whiter.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Because even
But
my friends who's like
Mhm.
African American, even they just Caucasian, they ask
Mhm.
me, "Hey, Nami, you are pale.
Mhm.
You look
Yeah.
pale."
Right?
Even then, me who is born to be white, but
Mhm.
why do you try to whitening cream or foundation and cushion? And even I didn't realize
Mhm.
I choose it because of that reason. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Sure.
It was very interesting conversation.
Yeah. So whitening cream is being sold all over the world. And so the Korean makeup companies are making huge profits because of the internalized racism that is at work. And so for internalized racism, it kind of manifests itself one of the two ways: internalized racial inferiority or internalized racial superiority. So depending on how you see yourself, the proximity to whiteness in this case, right? If you are closer to white, you feel superior. If you're far away from the white, closer to black, then people feel inferior. That's internalized racism.
Mm.
So, there are different aspects, but, since we're talking about skin colors, right, and how that is viewed by people, it's another name for that is also called colorism.
Mm.
Okay, so if you hear the word colorism, that's what it means. Closer to white, you are better. Away from white, closer to black, you are inferior. And what's so interesting is that if you have any African American friends, or if you talk with them or hear them, or like India, Indians from India, they have a very clear distinction depending on the hues of your skin color. So as they talk amongst themselves, right, even among the Black people, the blacker you are, then they're looked down upon. Okay, that's internalized racism. Or another word is colorism. Okay, institutional racism. What's institutional racism?
In a system, school, like.
Okay, yeah, so institutional
um,
racism is within an institution. So it could be school or church,
Mm.
right? Or health hospitals, right? In any institution, there is a racism that is expressed or experienced through different policies and practices. So what are some institutional racism that we experience within the United Methodist Church? I know that many of you may have felt like, oh, we don't have any racism in the United Methodist Church. This is a joke.
No, I don't think so, especially in the appointment system.
You don't think so?
I mean, no, I think we have it.
Okay, because you just said,
yeah.
I don't think so.
No, sorry. I think it's impossible to not have it on that kind of system. But maybe if someone said that, I think they couldn't say it because of the power dynamic issues.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm a DS, if I'm a bishop, why I cannot say it, but I'm a candidate, you know what I mean? So like that, I think that's the issues everyone knows we have it.
Sure, absolutely. So appointment system, regardless of what the cabinet says, regardless of how many times they say, oh, we don't have racism. I hope your cabinet, you don't have any cabinets who will say, oh, we're not racist and we don't have any racism in our appointment system. Because if they say it, they're lying. Right? So institutional racism definitely is it. We are part of this institution, and there is institutional racism that is rampant. So there's this one thing that I say to all the Korean pastors, and I'm not sure if I said it at the Madang Week. So I'm on this campaign telling all the CRCC pastors, Korean pastors, that we need to stop singing 부름받아 나서님은. You know that song, right? 부름받아 나서님은 어디든지 가오리다, right? So growing up, I sang that song so many times. I memorized all the verses. 아골골짝 빈들에도, right? So couple of years ago, I was doing a consultation with a cabinet somewhere down south. And we were talking about appointment system. So how appointment system is not the same for various pastors in different groups. So appointment system for white clergy is one. Appointment system for clergy of color is different. And so there are different ways the appointments are made, different thought process, and so forth. So we were talking about that, and one of the DS said, well, you know, we ask them where they want to go, and they just say, I'll go anywhere God sends me. So we just send them wherever. That was the response I got. And I was just so upset with that kind of mindset and the response I got. That's why now I'm on this mission. I'm telling all the pastors, stop singing that song. See, we are in a system that is very different than your your mindset or your faith. And I felt like, you know what, we are throwing the pearls to the pigs. Remember, that's what Jesus said. So we are in a system where if they ask you where you want to go, you need to articulate what your needs are, what your family's needs are, and where you need to be. And please do not say, I will go anywhere. Because if you say it, they will honor you in what you said, and they will send you to anywhere where nobody wants to go. So because of the institutional racism, and because these people, you know, the cabinet they have those churches where nobody wants to go. No white person will ever be sent there. And so now they have this clergy of color that they feel like they could send them anywhere because they said so, right? So that's institutional racism. And because we are in this institution that is riddled with racism, now we also have to understand this system that we are part of and be wise like a serpent. Okay? Are you hearing what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, then we have the systemic racism. So what systemic racism is, it's much bigger than an institution, right? Institution is one part of it. So what happens is that there are like one institution after another institution after another institution begin to have that same practice, same policy, then it begins to create a system where it becomes like a policy all across the board. And so it becomes, you know, it becomes this huge pull where the practice and the policy are now beginning to merge and beginning to look alike. That's systemic racism. All right, so any questions on the types of racism? Any question?
I do not have questions about the types of racism, but can I go back to the one human race thing?
Sure.
Because I know that there are people who use that phrase to support their own racism, like colorblind thing. We are all human race. We do not need to talk about racism. So
Right,
how can
right. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. People will use that. We're all human, one human race. And so why do we have to talk about racism? Right? We are all the same. And so, yes, that's the ideal, right? That's where we all want to be. We do have to talk about racism because that's the reality. Right? So for white people, they could say that because they are not the object or they're not subjected to racism. But for you, for me, for all of us, we all shared, we are all subject to racism in our daily lives, whether we are in church or whether we are outside. So yes, that's what we are striving for. That's why we are in ministry, helping people to see that and understand it, right? But until that day, right, we have to recognize that there is racism, because as long as you don't recognize that there is no racism, then there's nothing for us to work on. Okay. All right. Anyone else? Thank you for that question. Anyone else on question on what we talked about so far?
Well, as a clergy, I have been struggling with that issue as well. I mean, just my question, how could we react? Because kind of my DS always, she has given me a lesson, David, be patient. So I have been patient. I have never, what is the fault with my congregation? Kind of that kind of racist, they have a difficult time themselves because usually I have been patient. But
Right.
I'd like to ask you, well, what is your kind of advice and suggestion to when we have more difficult times with that kind of racist? So what is your kind of suggestion for us?
Sure. So when your DS tells you to be patient with your congregation who are racist, who is white, right? Your DS is a white person. So, so white person can ask you to be patient because it's not them who are experiencing racism day in and day out. So you could ask the DS, so explain to me, how do I, what is your definition of being patient? So if the persons, right, in your congregation refuses to respect you as who you are only because you look different, okay, you tell me, how can I be patient with this? And what are you going to do about it as my DS? Yeah, so it's one thing for DS to tell you to be patient, and it's another thing, what is the DS then going to do about it? Because it's not just your issue, your congregation issue. Now this issue is DS's issue, because DS is the one who's supposed to care for you and your congregation. Okay. All right. Other questions?
So while I listen to what he said, I got something. So what I want to say is that there is the racial issue, but there is the structure issue. For example, the DS as the power. Or so when DS says something, even we think that that is not fair, but sometimes many times we have to follow. As you mentioned that the DS is white, and then he said be patient, but as the other ethnic, we think that, oh, it's not good to be just patient, right? But we have to confront. But to confront that issue, but we have to confront with the structural power.
Mhm.
So I
Right,
think
exactly. Yeah. So that's why I was responding to David's question, asking the DS, so what are you gonna do about it? As you're asking me to be patient with my congregation, and I am trying to be patient, what is your role in this, right? So that you also put some onus on the DS or the powers of this structure. Because like I said, it's not just your problem as the pastor or the congregation's problem. Any individual local church and clergy issues are cabinet concerns. So then you can put it on them. What are you gonna do about it? How are you going to support me and this congregation so that we are able to grow, right? And combat this racism. And so, when you are asking, how are you going to, what is your role in this? How are you going to support me and my congregation with this racism issue? It's not like you are challenging their authority. What you are doing is you are also putting responsibility on them. And so, one thing is for us Koreans, we are very much hierarchical, right? Because that's part of our culture. And so understand we are in a different system, right? So United Methodist Church is as much as we have the hierarchical structures, it is still very much egalitarian system culturally. That's why we are able to call our DSs by their first name. And that's why some of our bishops will tell us, oh, call me by, Tom. Because for them, it's their culture is that egalitarian culture. So one thing that all of you have to work on is to overcome your own cultural context of origin, right? Overcome your Korean cultural context, and also begin to train yourself that it's okay to put the responsibility on the leadership. It's okay to challenge them because you are not in Korea anymore. This is one of the ways for you to be wise as a serpent. Make sense? And it will take practice. It's not going to come naturally or easily. All right, last question before we close. Okay, so I would like all of you to please unmute yourself, and let's just go around and sharing one word or one thing that you take away from our session today. And so just very quickly, so let's start with Taewon Ro. Can we start with you? And then you could invite the next person when you're done.
Okay. Comfort.
Comfort.
Yeah.
All right.
Suyan Kim, Reverend Suyan Kim.
We're not alone.
Okay, we're not alone. All right. Invite the next person, please.
아, 기성 목사님.
미션.
Mission. Okay. Next person, invite next person, please.
홍래 목사님.
My takeaway is be smart.
Be smart. All right.
I'm gonna invite 명은 박 목사님.
Enlightenment
Mm-hmm.
and 정당 목사님.
Not one word, but something that we can tolerate, and something we don't need to tolerate.
Okay.
Pastor Yohang Lee.
Change.
Sorry.
My takeaway is change, transformation.
Okay. Change. Okay. Who would you call?
I will call 조셉 목사님, 성요셉 목사님.
Yes.
Be wise. And I invite Reverend Nami Yu.
Self-examination.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who left.
Would you raise your hand if you have not yet gone?
Oh, I think we are all done.
I think David Moksanim hasn't
really?
gone yet.
I'd like to say the confidence in love.
Okay. Good. Well, thank you so much. So next week, we will spend the time learning about the history of racism against Asian Americans in the US. That begins in the middle of 1800s. So I hope you will come back for our session and have a blessed week, and we will see you. Can I ask any of you to please close us in prayer? Any volunteer to close us in prayer?
I will do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's pray. Gracious loving God, we thank you for today. You allow us to gather together, and we thank you for your presence within each of us and within each of our ministries. And we thank you for your grace by which you have called us to ministry. And then we thank you that you are our God, and then we are from you, and then you created us as a human beings. So today we acknowledge that we comes from you, and that we have your call. So bless us and bless each of our ministries and congregations. And then even though we in the foreign country, each of us is going through something in our context, but we trust you, God, and we know that you are with us as a comfort and peace and encouragement. So continuously lead us and guide us, and as we are going to meet again next week, let us know that we are not alone, but we are in confidence and love, and we are in grace, and so that continuously let us be strengthened and encouraged. And especially we thank you for your servant and the Reverend Grace Park, who give us the awareness and the insight and knowledge. So bless her and her family and her ministry. And so let us look forward to meeting again next week. And then until then, bless us and continuously use us as your blessing. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
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 Thank you so much. So we'll see you next week.
Thank you guys. See you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.